There's a number sitting inside a Pentagon briefing document right now that most Americans have never heard. And once you hear it, you'll understand exactly why the words ground invasion have started appearing in the same sentence as Iran again. Some of the analysts advising this administration believe that even in the most optimistic scenario, a full ground invasion of Iran, using 100,000 troops, could cost the United States 20,000 American lives. Not injuries, not casualties in the loose sense, fatalities. 20,000 in the best case. And Iranian estimates of what that number would actually look like are even higher. This is not fear-mongering from a corner of the internet. This is the actual range being discussed at the highest levels of American military planning right now in July of 2026, as the war with Iran grinds into its 5th month with no end in sight. Let's be completely clear about where things actually stand today, because this is a story where the truth is disturbing enough without anyone needing to exaggerate it. As of this week, no American ground invasion of Iran has happened. There are no confirmed reports of U.S. troops crossing into Iranian territory. What has happened? What is fully documented and confirmed? Asturias is that a ground invasion has moved from a theoretical worst-case scenario floated by outside commentators into something being actively discussed inside the White House itself. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, President Trump has held meetings with top aides this month, specifically weighing an expansion of military operations against Iran, with ground forces seizing Iranian islands near the Strait of Hormuz listed as one of the options on the table. When asked directly, the president has refused to rule out sending troops in. That refusal alone, coming from a sitting American president in the middle of an active war, is the kind of detail that should stop you cold. To understand how we got to this point, you have to go back to where this war began, on February the 28th. When the United States and Israel launched a joint assault that took out the very top of the Iranian regime, striking Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself in the opening salvo. That single strike triggered a wave of retaliation from Iran. Hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones fired across the region in the days that followed. What followed after that initial shock was a conflict that has never fully stopped since, one that saw a brief and now collapsed ceasefire in the spring, followed by a return to full-scale strikes by early July. As of this week, U.S. Central Command has now conducted more than 10 consecutive nights of airstrikes against Iranian targets, hitting command centers, air defense systems, missile and drone launch sites, and maritime capabilities, while simultaneously enforcing a naval blockade against Iranian ports. And here's the thing about air campaigns like this one. They have a ceiling. You can degrade an adversary's ability to strike. You can destroy missile batteries and radar stations and fast attack boats. And CENTCOM has reported destroying more than 60 of Iran's small attack vessels in a single overnight operation earlier this month. But bombing alone does not end a war when the other side refuses to surrender. And Iran has made abundantly, almost defiantly clear, that surrender is not on the table. A senior Iranian academic frequently described as a regime mouthpiece went on record this past week, boasting that Tehran has spent decades preparing for a ground invasion and would, in his words, welcome one. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson made a nearly identical claim just a day earlier, stating that Iranian leadership is counting down the minutes to welcome U.S. forces into any ground campaign. Whether that's genuine confidence or calculated psychological messaging aimed at deterring Washington from actually pulling the trigger, the message being broadcast from Tehran right now is unmistakable. They are telling the world they are ready, and in some cases they claim to want it. This is where the worse than we all thought part of this story really starts to take shape. Because when you actually look at what Iran would be defending, the picture gets significantly more daunting than a lot of casual war commentary lets on. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran currently fields somewhere around 570,000 active duty troops, backed by an additional 350,000 reserves. That is not a hollowed-out military limping along after months of airstrikes. That is one of the largest standing forces in the entire Middle East, supported by coastal missile batteries, sea mines scattered throughout its coastal waters, and swarms of fast attack boats designed specifically to harass and overwhelm larger naval vessels in exactly the kind of close quarters coastal fighting aground and amphibious campaign would require. Retired Marine General Frank McKenzie, who ran U.S. Central Command's operations across this entire region for 3 years, has publicly floated one specific version of a limited ground option, seizing Karg Island, a critical node in Iran's oil export infrastructure, as leverage for future negotiations. His logic is straightforward on paper, that holding Iranian soil would give Washington a stronger hand at any future negotiating table, but even a limited operation like that carries enormous risk in territory this heavily defended, and Iran's own military has already signaled just how far it's willing to go in response to any occupation. An Iranian army spokesperson stated flatly on state television this week that if American forces occupy Iranian territory, Iran would bomb its own land rather than allow that occupation to stand, describing that as simply the logic of war. Read that again: a government explicitly threatening to destroy its own territory rather than accept a foreign presence on it. That is not the posture of a regime looking for a graceful exit. That is the posture of a regime preparing its population for a fight it insists it will not lose. And this isn't the first time invasion fears have surfaced during this conflict either. Back at the end of March, Iran's own parliamentary speaker publicly accused the United States of secretly planning a ground invasion, even as diplomatic talks were supposedly underway, warning that any American troops who did enter Iranian territory would, in his words, be set on fire. Around that same period, the USS Tripoli arrived in the Middle East, carrying 3,500 sailors and Marines, a deployment that CENTCOM's own leadership discussed directly with senior Israeli military officials. That means the groundwork, in terms of naval assets and troop positioning, for some version of an expanded ground option has already been quietly building for months, well before this most recent round of White House discussions became public. Now layer in the human cost estimates on the American side, because this is where the reality of what's actually being weighed becomes almost impossible to look away from. Analysts examining what a full-scale invasion would require have pointed to costs that go well beyond dollars, estimating that even a best-case scenario involving 100,000 deployed troops could result in roughly 20,000 American fatalities. Iranian estimates of what such a campaign would cost American forces run considerably higher than that. And crucially, there is no guarantee, none, offered by any credible military analyst that such an invasion would even succeed in achieving its objectives. You could commit 6 figures worth of American troops, absorb tens of thousands of casualties, and still not achieve regime change or a clean strategic victory in a country of Iran's size, population, and terrain. This is precisely why some of the same voices warning about invasion are also warning that it would represent, in their words, the war's most dangerous escalation to date, a desperate response to an air campaign that, after nearly 5 months, has failed to force the kind of surrender or regime collapse that was likely the original goal back in February. Civilian infrastructure across southern Iran, bridges, railway stations, water facilities, food silos, has already been struck repeatedly. And Iranian officials have accused Washington of deliberately targeting areas with no clear military value. A claim that, if accurate, suggests the air campaign alone may be reaching the limits of what it can accomplish without expanding into something far more direct and far more costly. So where does that leave us right now, today, as you're hearing this? The United States has 10 consecutive nights of airstrikes behind it, and no clear indication that Iran is anywhere close to capitulating. A president who has publicly refused to rule out sending ground troops in. A regime in Tehran alternating between claims of decades of invasion preparation and public warnings that it will destroy its own territory before surrendering it. A standing Iranian force in the hundreds of thousands, backed by weapons specifically designed to make any amphibious or coastal operation as costly as possible. And American military estimates already putting potential losses in the tens of thousands before a single boot has confirmed to have hit Iranian ground. Nobody on either side of this conflict is pretending a ground invasion of Iran would be simple, quick, or cheap. The people closest to this decision, the retired generals, the intelligence estimators, the officials inside the briefing rooms where this is actually being debated, are the ones putting these casualty numbers on the table in the first place. That should tell you something. When the people with access to the most classified assessments of what an invasion would actually cost are the same people warning that the cost could be catastrophic, that isn't speculation from outside commentators trying to generate clicks. That is the sober, documented reality of where this war currently stands. Whether the coming days bring a genuine expansion into ground operations, or whether this remains a threat used to pressure Tehran without ever being carried out, one thing is now beyond dispute. If this war does cross that line, everything we've seen over the past 5 months, the strikes, the blockade, the missiles, the collapsed ceasefires, may end up looking like only the opening chapter of something dramatically worse.